Hello Year 9, Miss Yeomans here. Hope you're all well. We're missing you in school. I'm just really hoping that we get to see you soon. So this week your remote learning is again on Lord of the Flies. We'll be reading this in class and studying this in class in September. So the more you do while you're off school, the more knowledge you will have when you come back to us in September and we go through this together. This week the focus is Ralph, who is our protagonist. Now you'll remember from studying Julius Caesar and another text that we studied at Newfield that protagonist means sort of the main character. So we're studying Ralph this week. Our learning aims this week, well, we want to explore how Golding establishes this character. I'm going to introduce you to a key term, physiognomy. And you might have heard this word before. We're just going to recap if you've done it already, or we're just going to make sure that we know the definition of this term, and we're also going to explore how Golding uses physiognomy when he establishes the character of Ralph. We're going to analyse some of the key quotations for Ralph together. And then we're just going to consolidate that knowledge. So we're going to consider how Ralph changes throughout the novel and perhaps just write up some of the annotations that we've done, exploring Golding's intentions with this character also. You'll see on page 2 of the activity booklet that we're just starting with a quick quiz to recap what can you remember. So this is week 5 of studying Lord of the Flies, and you've done a plot summary or studied the plot in detail. You've also looked at some of the context, and last week you looked at the symbolism for the character, and some of the themes as well, I suppose. So yeah, just a quick quiz. What can you remember? The answers are also on page 2, but try not to cheat. So try and have a go without looking at the answers. Okay, page 3. Ralph, what do you need to know? You'll see some information that you're going to read through, but also that I'll talk through now with you. And you'll see at the bottom of page 3, there's some space to make some further notes. So I'll try and be really clear with you about what it is that I'd like you to write down and when. So at the beginning of the novel, Lord of the Flies, Ralph is voted as leader. Now, Ralph's ideas are really practical and sensible, and he also listens to the people around him. In particular, he listens to the character Piggy. Now, Piggy is the person who finds the conch, so the giant shell that the boys use to sort of enforce their rules or remind each other of the rules. It's actually Piggy's idea, but Ralph listens to Piggy and he's able to put that idea into practice. Now, it's important to note that Ralph, his wanting to be leader, it isn't about personal power or about triumphs or about being the top. For him, leadership is about ensuring that the group is taken care of and looked after. And some of Ralph's first jobs when he's elected as leader, some of his first priorities, if you like, well, he wants to make sure that there's a group of boys that build huts so that there's somewhere to live on the island. He wants a group to source food so that the boys have got something to eat. And he's also very keen to make sure that there is a fire and that fire is kept going all the time, 24/7. His idea about the fire is that if somebody is passing on the island, so a ship that's passing sees the smoke from the fire, then that ship will stop to investigate and potentially rescue the boys. So he's all about, his priorities are ensuring that everybody is looked after, taken care of, but also that rescue is his ultimate goal. He wants to go home. During times in the novel, Ralph does feel frightened, and it's important to remember that the boys are only young, so they're about 12 years old, and there's no other adults on the island. So understandably, there are times when Ralph feels really, really frightened. And in these instances, Golding tells us that he binds himself together with his will. And I just want you to make some notes on this quote here. He binds himself together with his will. Now that word bind is a verb. It's an action. If you bind something, it means that you are pulling something together. You are securing something. And in this instance, he pulls himself together with his will. And will means determination, something that you want. You're willing it to happen. So when Ralph feels frightened, he binds himself together with his will. Golding is telling us here that he is pulling himself together and determined to keep going, even though he's frightened. And I want you to just make a note of that. It's important for us to remember that even when Ralph is frightened, he still is determined to keep going. So we might use some words to describe him, such as brave or courageous. And again, get those words down. As the novel progresses, Ralph deteriorates, or at least his behaviour does. I want you to just make a note of these 2 points as well. Ralph does join in the hunting, so the violence that Jack and his choir boys, who later become known as the Hunters, he does join in the hunting, and Ralph is also present when Simon is killed, however accidentally that might be. So as the rebellion grows, the rules and the order start to lose meaning, and Ralph really struggles to remember and find meaning in what he is doing. There's a point later in the novel, and again I want you to make a note of this, where Ralph and Piggy go to meet with Jack and the Hunters. And the reason for going to that meeting point is because they're wanting to get Piggy's glasses back that Jack's stolen. And when Ralph goes along to this meeting, he quickly starts to get into a bit of a scuffle with some of the boys, and Piggy has to say to him, "Remember, Ralph, the glasses, remember." And that's really significant because it just shows us that without the rules and the order that society puts in place and adults put in place, Ralph tries to do the right thing, but as the novel progresses, he struggles with that. At the end of the novel, when the Royal Navy officer comes to rescue the boys, Ralph is incredibly emotional. I want you to just make a note of this word, wept, W-E-P-T, and it kind of means to cry uncontrollably. Ralph wept. And what that tells us is that Ralph is just absolutely consumed. He's overwhelmed by all that has taken place on the island. And the Royal Navy officer who comes to pick them up, he symbolises to Ralph what society, what civilization is like, and when Ralph sees him, he's just absolutely overwhelmed by how far removed they are from them, despite his best efforts to be a leader. So certainly as the novel progresses, Ralph really deteriorates. Now, we've already talked about, and you'll know from previous weeks, that Ralph is elected as leader. So what that means is that the boys have a vote on the island, and the majority of the boys vote for Ralph to be a leader. And on page 4 of your activity booklet, I'm just asking you to consider, well, what qualities make a good leader, first of all? And you'll see I've put some images on the screen there of different leaders that you might know or recognise. You'll certainly recognise at least one of them. We've got Mrs. Anderson there, and she's the leader of our school. And what makes Mrs. Anderson a good leader is that she listens. So Mrs. Anderson listens to staff. She'll listen to students, to parents, to governors, and this really helps Mrs. Anderson as a leader because with all of that listening she's done, she's gathered lots of different information from different people, and with that, she's then able to put the right decisions, make the right decisions for everybody. And she's able to do that because she's a good listener. So that's one quality that makes Mrs. Anderson a good leader. What I want you to do is I want you to consider a good leader that you know. So it might be Mrs. Anderson, or it might be your form tutor or a teacher that you know. If you play a sport, it might be somebody like we've got Gareth Southgate there, who is the manager of the England football team. So if you play a sport, there might be a manager of your football team that you think is a good leader. And I just want you to think about some of those good leaders. What qualities do they have? What skills do they have that make them a good leader? Once you've done that, I then want you to watch this short clip, and you'll see that's the link there to watch the short clip, and you can see Ralph being elected as leader on Lord of the Flies on one of the film adaptations. And as you're watching that clip, why do you think the other boys actually vote for Ralph? What qualities does Ralph show in that clip? And you'll see there's some space there just for you to list some of the good qualities that Ralph shows. When you're doing that, making that list, just try and be sure to use the best vocabulary. So I've started you off there with the word responsible, but what other vocabulary would you use that you think is top vocabulary to describe Ralph and the leadership qualities that he shows? Okay, so far we've looked at leadership. I now want to just secure your understanding of this word here, physiognomy. 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 Now, physiognomy is a person's facial features or expression, especially when regarded as indicative of character. I'm just going to break that down for you, Year 9. Essentially, physiognomy is when a writer will use a character's description to give you a clue as to that character's personality or behaviour. And writers do this all the time, and you'll see I've put some images there to help you understand this term physiognomy, and the images are of villains that you might recognise from Disney films. And often, more often than not, writers will often make villains to be the more ugly in appearance to reflect their ugly character. And conversely, the hero of a film or the heroine of a film is more beautiful to reflect their beautiful character, beautiful personality. And Golding uses physiognomy, and we're going to explore how he does that in relation to Ralph. So, I'm going to show you how I've annotated this quotation, specifically looking at physiognomy, then there's an opportunity for you to do the same. So one of the early descriptions we have about Ralph, and this is Golding describing Ralph's looks, is we're told that there was a mildness about his mouth. There was a mildness about his mouth. And I'm just going to show you some of the annotations that I've got for that quotation. Well, this noun, mildness, suggests to somebody who is gentle or calm. If you are mild, it means that you are relatively calm. You're not quick to react. And we're told that this mildness is about his mouth. Well, the image of the mouth, you think about the mouth is a key part of your facial expression, but also your words as well. So this image of the mouth, if it's mild, it suggests that Ralph is not threatening. He's not offensive when he speaks to others. Or he's not offensive in his facial expressions that he pulls. He's not frowning or grinning at people. There's a mildness there, a calmness. So what this quotation tells us is that he's probably quite approachable, that he listens. He's not quick to react, quick to shout. He's thoughtful before he speaks, because he's mild, he's calm. Consider the quotations that I've given you to describe Ralph's looks, and I want to see if you can get some annotations down there by yourself now. And do what I've done, so zoom in on keywords, think about the image, but ultimately think about how Golding is using physiognomy. How is Golding using Ralph's looks to establish the character that he is? Calm, good listener, responsible, etc. Okay, we've had some practice now annotating quotations. Now I'd like you to think about some of the key quotations about Ralph from throughout the novel. And these are in order because I do want you to consider how Ralph deteriorates throughout the novel, how his behaviour becomes more primitive. So, for this activity number 6, you'll see that there's some key quotations and there's a couple of questions for you to think about, because I want you to think about how does Ralph change, and I want you to think about what Ralph learns, and therefore what is the reader learning through Ralph as well. I've also given you a grid of some language features that you could use as part of your annotations. You don't have to use all of these language features, and some you might use more than once or more often than others. They're just there to get you started and to give you a bit of a help. We'll look at this first one together. So as I'm talking through this, you will need to make notes. You can either do this on paper, or you can do it on the computer, or if you're using a tablet, on the tablet using the Make Notes feature, or on a Word document. So first of all, I want to draw your attention to this verb lifted. He's lifting the conch here. Ralph lifted the conch. That verb lifted shows us a status. He's physically lifting something above the others. And you'll remember from last week that this word conch, the big shell, is symbolic of rules, symbolic of order. Ralph says as he lifts the conch, "Seems to me we ought to have a chief to decide things." Ought. It's a verb, and it is what we would call a modal verb, because he's saying that should happen. Should be a chief. That's what ought means. So by doing that, he's showing a sense of duty. There should be a chief, and that word chief means leader. Ralph's already assuming that role, because he's the one who's got the conch, he's lifting it up, and he's saying what should happen. He's already assuming this role of leader. You'll see there's some other quotations. We've done that one together. Use the language features in that grid and see if you can make some other annotations now by yourself. Once you've done that, we're then going to look at consolidating ideas. Okay, so consolidating ideas. You'll see that there's some sentences there to continue. You should use your annotations and the knowledge that you've gained from this week's activities to help you do this. Just like you would in school, you should remember to use top vocabulary when you are continuing these sentences, and you should have some in your notes from earlier on in the activity booklet. You should also be embedding quotations frequently. Using language terminology, so that means some of the language features, such as modal verb or noun, when you are analysing the quotations. And as always, Year 9, we would expect double comments, a double inference, so saying more than one thing about a quotation. Your annotations will help with this, but just as a reminder, you can zoom in on more than one word or different words from a quote, or you can talk about more than one language feature that has been used in a quotation. So that's one way to get to a double comment. Alternatively, you could use words such as could or might, maybe, so you could offer a different interpretation of a word that you've zoomed in on, or a language feature that's being used. They're just some ways to get double comments. Finally, Year 9, next steps. So, you've done a character study for Ralph. You could do your own character study for Piggy. And there's some useful websites such as Spark Notes or Schmoop that would help you to conduct that character study. Coming up next week, you'll be looking at Jack. Now, at the beginning of this video, I said that Ralph was our protagonist. So that means a hero, if you like. Well, next week, we've got Jack, who is considered our antagonist, the villain. So that's something to look forward to next week. Until then, we hope you have a good week. We hope you enjoy learning about Ralph and continuing studying Lord of the Flies, and we hope to see you all soon. Take care.